Okay. Hi there. I don't know. Word up, peeps. Blech. Word up, people. How's it going? Yeah, so I've been waiting to make this video for, I don't know, a couple weeks, I guess. Actually, a month. Two things that I would like to update you on, if you will indulge me. First is so I finally have received my copies of The Singing Bones. And of course, when I say I've received my copies, I mean I've received like the 10 copies I ordered. It's not like I'm buying boxes and boxes and boxes of these things. But this is a milestone. Obviously, the book launched on January 1st of this year. Today is the 9th of February, I believe. No, it's the 7th. It's February 7th. So, happy Valentine's Day. Both of you. Yeah, so this is very cool. This is third book is out, available in print and ebook, which is very, very exciting that this is done. That's certainly a fairly significant milestone for me, and it represents a bit of a break from publishing, because I will not publish another book in 2024. Just to put this in perspective, was it 2022? Yeah. In 2022, I released the first book in January 4th, the second book February 4th in 2022. Then last year in 2023, on October 31st, Halloween, I launched my first anthology. And then on January 1st, 2024, I launched book 3. So book 4 will launch sometime in 2025, and that is the second thing that I'm going to talk to you about. But first, let me finish a few thoughts here. I have self-published, 4 books in the last 3 years. Now, that sounds a bit more impressive than it actually is when you consider that prior to January 1st or January 4th, 2022, I had spent all of 2020 during the pandemic, during the lockdown, basically working on finishing the first 2 books in the series. Most of what you actually see in those books now came out of that process, out of that time period. So they definitely, were written. The bulk, I would say, was written that year. There was a bit of carryover from the first version of the book that was, came out earlier, but most of it was written in 2020, and then really refined in 2021, and then launched early 2022, in January and February of 2022. So there were 2 years that went into getting those books prepared for publication in 2022. Bones, I actually picked it up at the end of 2021. That's book 3 that just came out. I picked that manuscript up, which had been around for a long time, as you all have heard, ad nauseum. I tend to repeat myself. I don't know if I've ever said that to you, either of you, but I tend to repeat myself. Yeah, one of you got it, the other one. I picked it up at the end of 2021, but I really focused on working on it in earnest in 2022 and 2023 so that it was ready to launch January 2024. It was actually supposed to launch significantly earlier than that. It was supposed to launch in 2023, And originally, before that, it was going to launch at the end of 2022. I was actually planning on launching that book on Halloween, the same year that the first 2 books in the series were launched. Here, newsflash. That was insanity, thinking I could manage that. So, anyway, all of that is to say, give or take, we can say it takes 2 years to get a book from concept to ready to publish. I actually have that broken down, and I've probably mentioned that before as well. I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but I tend to repeat myself. But just in case I haven't ever said that before, I do tend to repeat myself. So I do have this broken down, like how much time is required to do each individual section of the first draft, the second draft, the developmental edit, the revised edits after the developmental edit, if there are additional copy edits, all of those things, all the way to proofing and then formatting and all that stuff. But just to simplify things, 2 years is kind of where that's landed. Now, there are other factors that come into play in this that determine how easily or how likely I am to get a manuscript finished in that amount of time, including my workload and my regular business, whatever that is, whatever projects I have going on with that. It also involves whether or not I am simultaneously or parallel working on an anthology at the same time, which I am doing now, because that's kind of how this works. I will work on Anthology 2 and Book 4 simultaneously because they will, the second anthology will launch after the 4th book, because there will always be 2 books in between the anthologies until we get to the final book. So let's just say that I am following that 2-year plan. I would probably be looking at the end of 2025 to launch the 4th book, The Gathering Grimm. And I'm not exactly sure. I may be able to bump that up, maybe around Halloween, something like that. But I don't really know yet. And this is one of the things that I'm trying to do and be very careful to do moving forward, is that I want to move at a pace that is good for the writing, the publishing, and for the poor writer. Publishing 4 books in 3 years was a colossal amount of work to do, and it created a good bit of anxiety and stress and frustration for everyone in my team to try and pull that off. And it wasn't that I was trying to rush anything, but just moving at a pace that feels natural tends to still be a bit of a rush, if that makes sense. So what I'm learning to do is kind of back up and really craft what I'm working on a bit more, but also just take the time to be present and not push to the point that it becomes unhealthy in any way or uncomfortable in any way. And I don't mean like a good uncomfortable. I mean a bad uncomfortable. There's a good uncomfortable. I want to be challenged. I want to be pressed. I want to be pulled out of my comfort zone. I certainly don't want to get complacent, but I'm not talking about that kind of uncomfortability. I'm talking about the kind that is a sign of too much stress and strain. So I am trying to take my time and move more slowly. The problem is, and this is the second thing that I was going to talk about today, is I am in the first draft writing stage of book 4. And I just finished around the end of last month, around the end of January, I just finished the middle section, the middle third of that book, the first draft. Now, first drafts, just to kind of get you on the same page with me, what I mean by a first draft, literally that is me getting the story on the page. I have an outline, a robust outline. The first draft is me getting the story on the page. And so already I know that when I go back and do my first full edit of a complete manuscript, which I won't do until I have the final third of the book written. I'm 2/3 of the way through this book. which is exciting. I will begin to focus on certain things like things like, are my characters' motivations and conflicts and goals, are they very clearly presented in a proper way? And that's something that requires a good bit of effort and thought. Now, I know what is motivating my characters. I know what their goals are. I know what their conflicts are and why they do this but don't do that, and all of those things. Those are kind of innate to me at this point. And so my first draft is just getting it on the page, you know, and then once it's on the page, then I can really refine and make sure to dial in. It's kind of like getting an EQ to an audio mix. I can really bring those things up or down and make them so that everything translates well to the reader. But that is on my second pass. Another thing that I will pay attention to on the second pass is making sure that my speech patterns and things like that are all in alignment with the character and how I've established these characters, the way they think, their worldview, outlook on the world around them, all of those things. I will begin to pay attention to those things as well, because while I'm in this first draft writing stage, I'm literally wanting to get the story on the page. Now, I am not ignoring all of these things, but that's not my primary focus. What has been my primary focus in writing this is making sure that all of the trusses that are connecting and hold each individual book with the greater story, and how all of these things interact together to tell the greater story, the bigger story, the epic story that we're working toward. That is the part that I've really had to focus hard on during this section. Here's the thing that is perhaps the most interesting about where I am in book 4. The projected scope of this series is currently 7 books, with 3 primary anthologies and 1 additional, it's probably not going to be called an anthology compendium or something, that will be a bit of a different situation. It'll have all the terms with some sketches and story sketches as well as illustrative sketches, different things like that. But anyway, the primary series, the main books in the series, the target right now is 7 books. That is what I foresee coming, and I feel pretty certain that is the case. I have just finished the middle act of the 4th book in the series. So I've written the first 3 books. I'm in book 4, and then I will have books 5, 6, and 7 left. So there are 3 before, 3 after, and I just finished the middle section of the middle third of the 4th book in the 7-book series, which means, I don't know what I'm doing with my hands, which means I am at the midway point of writing, at least first draft writing, this series. And that's pretty exciting. There's something incredibly fun and exciting about seeing the story come alive on the page. Outlines can get me excited too, but writing this first draft is probably the most fun I have in this process. I don't know. It's kind of a tough race between it and when I actually sit down to record the audiobook, because it's usually been enough time and I'm not focused on editing. In fact, I won't let myself think about editing when I'm recording the audiobook, apart from very, very basic. If there's a typo, I make a note of that. But the purpose is not editing. So essentially, when I'm recording the audiobook, that's the first time I just get to experience the book as a reader. Every other time I am writer, author, editor, publisher. And so recording the audiobook, yes, I'm paying attention to how it sounds and my delivery and all of those things. But it's the first real opportunity I have to just enjoy reading the book. So that's really exciting, and it honestly rivals this first draft stage, just in terms of how much pleasure it gives me. But I would argue that this first draft writing stage does kind of jump ahead in terms of being my favorite, because it is such a surprising discovery process. Because translating an outline to a book, the outline is broad strokes with some key points, pinned down along this journey to help me find how to get from one point to another. But it's not until I'm writing that I realize that some of the mechanisms I had in my outline to get them from point A to point B to point C to point D to point Z, some of those mechanisms are clumsy, or they don't work, or it's only as I begin writing that I realize that something changed in the last book or in 2 books ago that impacts something in this book. It's not until I'm fleshing it out do I realize greater depth in my characters' motivations and their conflicts and their development. All of these things. It's just such an exciting process. And this middle section of book 4 is particularly important because it is, not only is it literally the center of this book series, but it is also the fulcrum on which the series will balance. Meaning, without giving away any spoilers, the first 2 books in the series are Eliot's story, and almost like an origin story for Dathan. The 3rd book in the series, The Singing Bones, that is really Gray's story. And then the 4th book takes Eliot and Dathan's narrative and Gray's narrative and combines them, locks them together for the first time. So there is a very magical moment in the first third of this book where we see those 2 stories and those 2 different character groups in some form finally come together, and it is very satisfying for me, and hopefully it will be very satisfying for you, my reader, as well. Both of you who are watching this video. I'm not going to say I repeat myself because I don't. But I know I've made that "there are 2 of you watching this video" joke so many times now. But I thank both of you for being here. Anyway, so the first 3 books in this series essentially are very intimate. They are very centered around a single character. I mean, there are other characters in the story and they develop and they have their own kind of things going on. But usually we're focused on one character's coming of age, or book 1 is a coming of age story. Book 3 is a coming of age story. Book 2 is less of a coming of age story and more of a, just kind of overcoming the trials and everything from the first book and it's more of a dealing with your demons kind of story. And book 4 is kind of like that too. Perhaps it's a coming of age story in a sense, depending on how you define those terms and look at it. But the middle third is where we really begin to show just how broad the greater conflict of the story is, and we begin to look ahead. We begin to look ahead at where we're heading, the great climax of this series, the great conflict of this series, and we're looking, I mean, it's always going to be an intimate story. It's always going to very intimately follow my characters. But this is the point where the story really begins to shift so that it's no longer their coming of age story or their dealing with their demon story. It is now the story of this broader issue and how they are a part of that. I don't want to lose the intimacy of it. So the challenge is to add that scope while still maintaining a very intimate connection with my characters. And that's exciting. This middle section of The Gathering Grimm is where the balance begins to shift, and we begin to start looking less at personal struggles. Those personal struggles are always going to be there, obviously, because that's the nature of being a human being, whether real or fictional. But we begin to focus on the bigger picture, which is very, very exciting. Because after this, the kind of direction of where this series is heading is going to change drastically. It's going to change dramatically. Here is an interesting way to look at it. You could almost see this story as though the first two books are their own thing. The third book is kind of a standalone novel. Those are kind of prequels. And then book 4 is the series proper. If I had wanted to do that, I could have done that. Let's say if I'd started with book 4, I could have written book 4, 5, 6, and 7 as the series, and then gone back later and written prequels that were the Scarecrow Hunters and A Greedy Shadow, and then the Singing Bones. Because that's almost how they feel, except that's not what I did, because I wanted to start there. That's where the story begins, and that's how we get to the end. But I had a reader review The Singing Bones, and he said, it's the third book in a series, but it can be read independently of the first two books, and that is true. I wouldn't necessarily suggest you do that, because there's a lot of nuance in there that I feel like you might appreciate from the first two books. But also, I think it's a satisfying follow-up to the first two. So that's all the news that is news from across Casa de Love. I hope that you are doing well in this new year, 2024, and you have not made superfluous New Year resolutions that you've already abandoned, because it's about that time when people fail to keep pretending to do their resolutions. But here's a little bit of advice, or here's a little bit of encouragement for you. You don't have to wait for January 1st to start resolutions. I tend to have an ongoing, nearly daily process of taking self-inventories. And in particular, if I begin to notice there are patterns of things that I don't like, let's say I'm gradually gaining weight and I don't want to do that, or I'm gradually staying up later at night and getting less sleep, or I'm just over time my diet is getting a little bit lax and I'm beginning to eat more junk food, or I'm not preparing enough wholesome, nutritious meals, and I'm instead just eating little snacks. Even if they're healthy snacks, they're still snack food. They're not meant to, sustain me nutritionally. If I begin to recognize those patterns, then I resolve to, first of all, make a practical plan that I can actually walk out, I can execute well. The point is I will self-inventory on a regular, semi-daily, almost daily basis, if not a daily basis. And as I begin to recognize patterns and realize, I need to tighten this up, or I need to kind of fix this a little bit, I will make a plan, and then I will take steps to activate that plan. If you find yourself in a situation where you made all these resolutions at the beginning of the year and you find yourself flagging, now don't worry. Don't beat yourself up. Maybe try again, this time making resolutions that are a bit more attainable, a bit easier to execute. And once you're really good at that, then add a bit to it. Once that is part of your routine and it's established, add a bit more to it. And then over time, by this time next year, you'll be way ahead of the curve. And when it's time for, when everyone else is scrambling to come up with their New Year's resolutions, you will have already lived out your revolution. Wow. Right now, you don't know if I'm saying wow because I'm impressed with myself or like something else. Anyway, peace out, home skillets. I wish you all the best. I hope that whatever you're doing, it's great. If you're a writer and you're in this process on this journey like I am, then I would love to hear about it. And if you're not a writer, but you have your own creative or entrepreneurial venture that you're working on, feel free to let me know, either of you, what's going on and how you're doing, and if there's something particularly specific you would like to ask me about in my own writing process. Whatever, just, just trying to get you to engage in some way because that's what we're supposed to do. Anyway, peace out. Be good most of the time. Be good most of the time, but always be decent. And always be kind. And sorry if this is redundant. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I tend to repeat myself. Oh, that joke clearly doesn't get old to me, not when I'm saying it, but when I'm editing it, I will probably want to punch myself in the face. I won't, because I'm more of a grappler over a puncher, but I'm picturing myself self-grappling. Oh.